I really look forward to it. I know we shared a little bit of discussions around the DMBOK version 3 or some of the changes, but I think that's the last time we spoke, and I've seen a lot of your work on maturity assessments and some of the interesting stuff you're doing, and look forward to your data product book. I think it's a topic that lots of people are addressing at this point in time. So all yours, sir.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. I'll start sharing screen. I hope that it will go well. It was a little bit slow this morning, but let me know if you guys can see it.
Oh, yes. What are we going to talk about?
Yep. So maybe to start, and I know we have like 40-ish minutes or something. I could probably talk the rest of the week on topics like the ones that we kind of are covering here. But maybe first to just real quick cover like why data products, like why write about it to begin with. And so it really kind of goes, Howard, and maybe the rest of everybody here or maybe listening after, it kind of goes back to more than anything this realization that I believe a lot of companies out there, probably all of the dominant bigger companies in sectors with a kind of a minimum amount or complexity of data have like 2 or 3 years in my mind to get to some kind of minimum maturity on their data foundations so that they can actually benefit from the acceleration that brings AI, the agentic capabilities, things like that. And so I think in the past, maybe many of you here have spent time on data governance and data management. And I think a lot of the lessons learned were paid by sectors that had to do so because of regulatory compliance issues or requirements. I think if you look ahead now, if you think about this term like AI readiness, you really want to kind of be able to make the most out of the acceleration that the automation and enhanced intelligence that for example agentic capabilities bring. It just doesn't work if your data doesn't work, right? And so if you take that as a starting point, then data products is not the answer for everything, but it is one of the key ways to make as much progress as quickly as possible, right? Because at the core, a data product will help you kind of identify, if you focus on a couple of data products, your most impactful data that is driving your most impactful use cases within your respective context. And so what the book is doing is providing an end-to-end very, very practical handbook, right? Or playbook. So it really gives you as practical as possible, kind of the best of what we've seen around, like how would you, so if you understand, if you kind of accept that initial premise, then how do you actually go about enabling these data products? So having said that as kind of an introduction, the book has kind of 3 parts in this presentation today as well, because I'm kind of just roughly following the course of the book. So we talk a little bit about foundations of a data product, like what is it? Like what is really kind of a data product? What are different types of data products? Having understood that, like how do you go about designing and building really great ones? So think about a life cycle. How do you quantify value? Some architectural guidelines, for example. And then finally, dedicate attention to the people side, right? Because at the end of the day, it's really about dealing with people and change. And so I'll try to see how much of this we can kind of get through. But before we move on, Howard?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, when you talk about a data product, do you include the data contract as part of it, or do you see that as a separate element?
For me, if you think about and I'm not sure if I included this one today, like if something is qualified as a data product, right? And so there's kind of a definition or some thresholds that you can define for a given context, then it automatically follows that you should give it appropriate attention so you can drive the right amount of value off of it. That means that you need to have 8 to 10 kind of certain certification criteria in place. And one of them is data contracts. So that's one of the things like where and whether you actually go all the way to having a formal data product, a contract or not, I think it depends a little bit on the context. But I think in a lot of cases, yes, like you would include into the definition the fact that you have an explicit agreement between data that comes from a certain place under certain requirements, under certain allowed use cases for a certain
Quality
time.
and yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep. So I'll just move on, and maybe the slide is going to take a couple of seconds to change. I fear.
There
Here we go. So what's the
we
data
go.
product? So I'll keep this one super short and simple. So just starting at the very basic, the very highest level understanding. Well, data product at the core is really you take data from at least one, usually several data sources, and you make them available to specific data consumers. Right? That's the easiest thing to kind of to start a data product with. And so it can be the case that these data sources are unstructured, they're structured. Again, there could be one or two, there could be 10,000. It could be that a data product is highly transactional, real time generated. It could be it's only once a year that's being generated. It could be that the data consumers are really kind of one tight use case, one tight group. It could be a publicly, literally on the internet published, asset. Any of these flavors are possible, but at the core, any data product is where the data sources go into a certain spot, and they are treated as a product, right? So I'll get to some of the other dimensions that you would connect to qualify something as a data product, because otherwise, if you would look at this image, you would think that, well, pretty much anything that gets data, merges data is a data product. And that's obviously not the case as well either. So there's 9 defining properties that I believe exist for data products. In the book, we obviously kind of talk about them in a lot more detail, but on the visual on the right that I'm sure you'll assume I didn't draw by hand is it's too easy these days, right?
Yeah.
But there's 9 defining data products that can really help to kind of understand what makes something a true data product. And then you'll potentially be confused for just a minute if you haven't read the book yet, like why we're looking at a kitchen, right? And so why are we looking at a kitchen? Well, it's because one of the key analogies that we use is that of let's say the ingredients that flow through a kitchen. And so if you think about the chefs in a kitchen, or let's say the decision makers, the people who want to use and drive analytics in a company, right? And so like they want to spend as much time or all of their time as possible working with the right ingredients so that they can focus on building great dishes, right? They want to focusing on their clients, their customers, building really great stuff, really great dishes so that they can delight their customers. What they do not want to do is have to actually go drive out in nature, find some tomatoes, or for example, like wash them themselves, try to figure out what good looks like, negotiate the price, all these different things. Like that's kind of like if you go back to like the core of a data product, is that what you really want to make sure is you want to enable this set of data consumers. You want to keep them at kind of the core of the data that you have, so that they are perfectly enabled to actually drive let's say an optimized amount of impact. And so if you translate that into the properties, like which things need to be true for that to actually result in a right effect, 9 defining properties come up. So one is valuable, right? So the tomatoes are used infrequently for popular dishes. That is to say, if you have an ingredient in a lot of kitchens, but the chefs just really don't need it, well, then you can't be that a product, right? It's not valuable. The second part is discoverable. Okay, so given that it's something that people agree is useful, they need to be able to find it, right? Addressable is that they're in the same spot, like they don't move. It's actually one of a more formal kind of property, but it means that they don't. It's the chefs in this example like know where the tomatoes are. They can rely on them. They know where they are. Understandable, right? So in this case, a container with tomatoes has clear labels. It says relevant information about the details, the constraints around it, so that they can be easily understood. It's interoperable, right? Any chef who has a use for them can take them. You can put them in a pan, a pot, a blender, but you can take them and it works, right? So it's trusted as well, which means they're fresh, they're high quality, they're safe. And so that's a part has to do with trust, right? That's kind of how you mentioned data quality. Like that's kind of the trusted part here. Like so, if a chef can't trust the tomatoes, like half of them are bad, like it's gonna affect like what the dishes. Like either they're going to spend way too much time sorting out which tomatoes are good and not good so that the dish itself becomes more expensive, or they don't and they just keep making the dishes and actually the dish gets bad. Then if we look at secured, bottom left, you can see that they're sealed and stored safely. So like not everybody can kind of get to them, and which kind of goes to the data contract piece as well, so that not everybody can take them. So they're secured. And then most can kind of lead the last one, managed as a product, right? Very, very important as well, that a chef can prep and label them continuously based on feedback, right? So you're not making tomatoes for the sake of it. For example, you're making them because you know that there's identifiable individuals who need them. So that's 9 defining properties of data products, right? So like, and if you kind of project these onto, let's say, data, like they're all the same. That's what defines a data product. Like data is valuable, they're easy to find, it doesn't move, right? We know where to find them. They're easy to understand. They're interoperable, so you can take them and use them in different use cases. They're trusted and high quality. They're secured and safe, and they're managed as a product. Having said that, still, this might be the case for a lot of different data products. Yes, Howard. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry to bother you. It's always important because some people use the term data assets and data products, and I think one of the complaints with the DMBOK, it was more focused on assets than it was on a product. And so there's this move towards being managed as a product, and not everything is, not all assets are being managed like that.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. I had for many, I think probably years, I'd used them interchangeably, and like now I've started to use data products a little bit more for the targeted, where you actually applied you're managed. It's kind of the last one, right? You manage them as a product is one of the key defining properties. And so for example, you have a product manager assigned. Like that's like somebody who's actually seeing themselves as an owner of as a product manager and treating them as a product, right? So with an intake, like with a pipeline, with things like that. So
and then Gabriella has asked, is an AI model a data product, and what about an API?
Getting to that. Perfect.
Okay.
Not alone. So the types of data products, right? Because I think this is very, very, I would say, confusing at times. Like I've come into at least 50 different organizations, like the same question. So what's a data asset? What's a data product? And very different local definitions assigned to kind of these labels. And I still think actually that worldwide, we haven't necessarily always landed on some really crisp and clear type of data product, but at least I tried to kind of have a go at like categorizing the different types that I'm at least aware of. And so there's at least 2 categories, first of all, source-oriented and use-oriented. And so the source-oriented are indeed closer to the source. So it's usually the case that there's some sort of kind of operational core process or platform, and a data product is a very close derivative of that platform or these platforms. One example is reference data products. It's very easy one, right? It's not maybe the most interesting one. It could be country codes, product taxonomies. They actually can get fairly complicated, but they're stable. There's a finite set of values that exist. The second one is master data products, right? So think about customer 360, product masters, like a type of data product where that give context to the transactions that happen in a given organization. Then the third and final one here is kind of a transactional data product, right? So anything that isn't kind of a reference or a master data product, which gives context to the debt transactions, but the transactions themselves. And depending on what the company or organizational context is, like they could be anything, like anything that repeats over time, orders, claims, clicks, invoices, supply chain movements, anything that happens on a transactional level. All of these tend to be source oriented. That is to say, they kind of still follow the structure of how the data had been created and used in these kind of core operational, usually operational processes. Now, if you then go a step further, you go to kind of use oriented data products, and so that's kind of where they're usually actually based on other source oriented data products, or if not data assets, and they are now more tweaked, changed, transformed so that one or several use cases can actually more readily use them. And so if you think about the first one is an analytical data product. So think about like sales dashboards, daily user accounts, quarterly forecasts. It usually runs on the source-oriented data products that you see above, but it now starts to create something that can be used for analytical use cases, right? It starts to be able to give you different insight. Then the next one, model-driven data products, that's where the AI becomes part of it. Like that's kind of where analytical, let's say, jobs, they are now incorporated as part of the data product. So for example, if you think about churn scores, right? So you actually have, there's customer data, which is mastered, right? So that may go in here. There's transactional data that comes in, for example, maybe the purchases they did in the last 2 years, or maybe like the clicks they have online. But then now the model itself, as contained in the same kind of data product structure, calculates a churn score, right? And creates a new column with like a churn score attached to these respective data, these customers that you have, and that now becomes a data attribute itself, right? So the model, that the AI, let's say, becomes part of the data product here. And then the final one is the experience-oriented one, which is really just there to answer the question, can a dashboard be a data product, right? Like sometimes like a dashboard, it takes data that already exists somewhere else, like it's a transactional database, or again, it's a customer 360, for example, or whatever it might be, and it just takes a cut of that and makes it available through, let's say, a UI, right? The last category just emphasizes the fact that it's not just about the data. There's a layer, there's a visualization, there's a UI, there's an interaction. Maybe like final comment or two. Now, the last two do exist, right? So, everywhere we see the AI models, we look at the dashboards, but for most intents and purposes, on my personal, let's say, interest, I'm almost exclusively focused on the first four, right? At least those are the ones that for the purposes of treating data like an asset and treating data like a product, and helping kind of organizations on their journey. Almost all of my, at least, my attention has gone out to the first four. The fifth and sixth are still there, but like usually when it comes about like whether or not there's a layer of AI in there or it's a dashboard is not necessarily a part that interests me the most. But hope that helps. I think I'm taking way too much time, like I thought I would. Anyway.
So really, just to confirm there, your answer to Gabriella is that the model and the API could be considered a data product as you've defined here.
I think, yeah, definitely. But if it's only the model, let's say, then it's just then not. But I think if it's part of a broader data product, like for example, like the data product here is you bring in, if you take the example, you bring in the customer initial master data, you bring in the transactions, and you run an algorithm to calculate a churn score, and you create that, and you bring that all of that, and you make it available. Then yeah, it's part of it. It's definitely part of it. Yeah, and there's a blueprint I'll show after, a more architectural blueprint where you can see that these can be part of a given data product. So I'll keep this one maybe somewhat short. But having talked about what is a data product, what types exist, why do they drive value, one of the, again, potentially not the most sexy or things to talk about, but what is a real practical value is, so what do you then do about it? Like once something qualifies as a potential data product, like what are very specific steps you can follow to make sure that they actually will drive the value that you think they can, right? Because again, like any data product in its core is valuable. If it's not valuable, it can't be that product. And so there's many pages in the book that kind of like lay out each of these steps in quite some details, and tells you like what the things are to consider at each of these steps. I'll talk left to right, high level, but it actually starts with planning, right? So where you actually have the ideation phase and where people have ideas to create new data products. So there's things around how do you create a business case, how do you get funding, how do you get the initial team together so that you make sure you actually get from left to right on this page. There's steps around the analysis, like how do you create the business requirements, specific data requirements. Actually, a really good point to bring in here the respective data privacy teams, if that's of interest. Some as a step is very often forgotten. You come into design, right? You actually, put pen to paper and you imagine what it could be. So there's steps around the data model, the architecture, the quality and integrity, a couple of other things that you would think about at a design stage. There's the build phase, right? You ingest the data, you integrate it, you pretty much follow the steps that you have in a design phase. You enrich it if needed. You make sure that all of the processing, storage, consumption are taken care of, and you also actually create some of the let's say technical and operational metadata at this point. You go into deployment, which I think is self-explanatory, right? You test it out, you deploy it to production, make sure there's documentation of the process, you harvest metadata, hand it over to whoever owns it going forward. You use it, you start using it. Any data, like one of the other certification criteria is usually that it has to be discoverable, which almost always means that it needs to be in some sort of catalog, right? People must be able to find it. So this is where you publish it. Access control and provisioning, training, consumption value and value tracking. That's actually one of the things that isn't always, it's very hard to do for a lot of companies and organizations to actually track how many people are actually using it, and like go back to people and check how much value actually is created. Maintenance, so there's ops and monitoring. Make sure you continue to be compliant with policies and standards. Data quality control, obviously, in the longer term as well. Driving change as different changes come through. And then actually, like any real asset in real life as well, like at some point you may get to demise. It's actually a very important point as well, because you see data landscapes. The promise of cloud was it's going to be cheaper, right? That was always like, it's easier to do. You can model out where it needs to be, how often you access it. It's going to be, if you left the data centers with the cloud providers and you don't have to do it yourself, it's going to be cheaper, but actually it isn't really cheaper. And why? It's because it's so easy to create everything, right? And so like and having an actual life cycle and tracking some of these and eventually actually pushing them to demise is actually one of the promises that data products help as well with, right? Because if you truly kind of rationalize how you can, capture your most critical data through a select set of data products, then it should make it a lot more efficient. It doesn't really do justice to kind of talk through it so quickly, but I took two things out of this life cycle to talk about in a little bit more detail. Although if there's questions about any of the other steps, I can take them too. So one of them was the business case. Like that's, I think, framework. So there's a very, very specific framework that anybody can kind of take and lift off the book and start working with it if you want, because it's really very critical to help kind of build a long-term, let's say, data product that drives the right value. And so in the framework and in the templates that you'll find, there's a little bit of a description, so that, again, because if you pitch a business case to anybody, you need to be able to succinctly summarize what's this data product doing. So usually there's something about product, of purpose, the contents, who are actually going to use it, how are you going to get to it, and what are the key characteristics of how you're doing that. Then the part at the bottom of the page here, and that we work out in a lot more detail, again, in the book, is about the benefits and the costs. Like, how actually would you do that? And so there's a couple of different ways that are outlined, but the most dominant way, the most easy to use, is this way, right? So if you start with the benefits, there's a way that you can take any given data product and you tie it to how are you going to be using it, right? And so it is the case that these might be business processes that already exist, right? In which case you might be able to talk to somebody or to a team right away, ask them about how are you using it, what would happen if you would no longer be using it. And sometimes it can be a more futuristic scenario as well, right? You might have a data product where the use case hasn't really been developed yet, right? If you go back to AI readiness or some of the agentic capabilities, well, they aren't live yet, or perhaps, right? And so sometimes you have to be a little bit more creative, and the use case can be more forward-looking. But in any way, like almost always, the key to being able to confidently, estimate the benefits is through use cases, right? So that a use case, again, is an actual, usually it is something that relates to a business process, like some group or some individual, some particular, process that use the data that is deriving value. Like the data product in and of itself is not valuable. Howard?
An interesting point there in terms of your data quality is, and I know the EDM Council actually used this term called the haircut. Basically, if your quality is not meeting that required specification or where it needs to be, that it's actually cutting the value down or reducing the value. Is that, when you say costs, is it costs of bad quality? Or
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There's definitely examples, because exactly, depending on the use case, the impact can be in there in always four ways and only four ways. And in my world anyway. So either revenues, right? Either the upside goes up, or the costs go down, or the experience of either your employees or your customers, which eventually is going to drive revenues and costs, but even that one's going to be impacted, or it's risk mitigation. And so this one you're mentioning, it could be actually a couple of these. Like it could actually, bad data could impact all of them, but most often is associated with the cost driver, because there's a lot of downstream, for example, work you need to do to continue to clean this. I mean, the last time you talked about maturity assessments, I've done probably over 100 in my life. But like just the last couple of ones again, where we also interviewed, analytical teams, and they continue to say that over 50% of their time is spent on finding and fixing the data. They're not actually spending the majority of time on, working with the data. And so that is a huge cost. Yeah. And just being able to get to like some kind of, again, ballpark number is usually all you need. Like you don't have to get it right behind the comma. Like if you can say, which we were able to do in some cases, like, look, if you, if you, this was a financial organization a while back, where we were trying to figure out like what's the value of a single record, what's the value of having the right contact information of a single individual? Like how much worth is that? Is that like $1? Is it $10? Is it $100? Like what happens if you don't have that information? And so we were able to then, at that point, we were able to look at kind of the customer contact center, for example, to try to see how many, and there's a very specific example only, like there's specific communication that must reach a given customer. And so like a lot of these letters would bounce, right? So you would be able to show if certain data isn't complete or accurate and they're not responding to it, you could actually fairly accurately track how many times like the communication would bounce. And so eventually, if that happens, it means there's a kind of a second line team who have to spend time completing the data, calling them deliberately, trying to, et cetera, et cetera. Those costs you can estimate. And if you then bring it all back to like the initial data, you actually got, in this case, it was several $100s for a given record to be complete. That's real. Right, that's a very real quantification of data in a given situation. So yeah.
Right.
Then costs. It's not that I don't think is that interesting. So I'll kind of glaze over it quickly. But there's a structured way that if you think about data products, you kind of do have to think about like total cost of ownership. Right. It's not only about maybe somebody who's hands on bringing in some data and making some changes. You do have to kind of sometimes bring back also like the platform costs and some of these other categories, but there's a fairly detailed way described on how to do that in any of these cost categories that probably is not the most interesting to talk about right now. And then you bring it together, right? So the years, the cost, the benefits, and you're able to get to a single number for let's say 3 or 5 year timelines most often. Now, why don't you just I'm just looking at time. But there's one example to just make this a little bit real. Even though Howard, based on your question, we kind of made it real already. But there's one example that I've included throughout as a red line almost throughout the narrative about a financial reconciliation engine, right? And so it's not just the data. There's actually some kind of analysis that happens, but it's basically in let's say in a company in a retail or a company that has thousands of transactions that are being done with their customers. Like they need to reconcile from the enterprise resource platform. They need to reconcile that with their financial platforms, because it's not always the same. It's not always the case that people pay exactly at the moment that the ERP transaction is reflected, right? Sometimes they're sent back, sometimes there's a defect, sometimes they pay with a loan. There's all sorts of reasons why sometimes the payment bounce later. There's all sorts of reasons why the transactions from a let's say an ERP perspective might not match exactly the transactions on the financial ledger, right? Or for example, if the transaction happens on a Friday, but the payment doesn't go through because of time zones until Monday, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a data product here that actually takes data from these two principal sources, right? So if you think back on the types, there's other transactional databases that have the transactions of both of these products, and they bring them together and they match them, right? That's what this product effectively does, and it creates a single trusted view of reconciled financial activity. And so now, if you want to actually talk about what's the value, right? Because at the end of the day, you might have this story, but does that mean like if it cost $1 million to build this and maintain it, like is that worth it? Because the fact that it's valuable, like how valuable is really the question. So in this case, and then we even simplified it, there's at least 3 different use cases, right? These are these business process applications that use this particular data product. One is the month-end close, right? So that's actually the activity where you take typically the transaction for both of these sides, and you actually bring it together to try to see what matches and what doesn't. Like that's something that happens all the time. It's very manual. It's annoying work. This type of data product helps to speed that up tremendously, right? Because it actually automates a lot of this work. So it cuts overtime, etc. In this case, it would be, let's say, $500,000 a year. It's somewhat operational, but that's a cost efficiency saver. And for each use case, I only picked the primary benefit driver this time. Then you got cash application collection. Like that's the case, like if, let's say an ERP transaction goes through, but the financial transaction for whatever reason didn't, right? If you miss them, you don't follow up, like you might, they call it revenue assurance, right? You might miss the revenue, you might not get it. And so that's, in this case, like this type of data product could prevent 0.1% of revenue from being missed or delayed. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's bottom line stuff, right? Because it's already, like the costs are already made. So this is all direct bottom line improvements. And so that could drive, let's say, about $1 million a year. Then the last one, audit and compliance. Well, there's a lot of requirements that make that kind of hold companies accountable for having accurate financial activity, right? Audit teams, regulators, they need to get access to the right records. In this case, here that you actually save prep time, but it also may save compliance penalties. This may be a topic for a different chat. Like, how do you actually do that? Because it's hard, right? Like, how do you quantify something that didn't happen? But it's definitely real. And so, like, hopefully, this is an example of how you can take a single data product and start getting real numbers on a business case so that you can kind of justify why you should continue to treat it like indeed a data product. I hope that helps. Awesome. So I promised a blueprint. There's different versions of these, I suppose, but like here's one that I'd used because I like it because it's simple. I like simplicity most of the times. And so what if you think about a data product blueprint, it could be something like this, right? So any data product, again, always has data sources coming in. It's kind of almost a little bit more of a more detailed version of the initial slide I showed you all. There's internal sources, external sources, and then they kind of come in. And then almost all data products have some sort of raw curate, they land raw. You apply some data quality, metadata, integrity, requirements that now make them supposedly curated or trusted. Then you may or may not layer on top features, right? If you recall the churn model that we talked about earlier, like that's where a given data product may actually create some new data, or it may create a calculation or a prediction, and eventually you make sure that it's ready to be let's say consumable as a product, right? It's kind of there's something you could potentially project sometimes like a medallion structure to some of this, but for me it wasn't necessarily the point of the book here. Now, to be able to do that, there's things you need to have in place, right? Those are the 3 boxes in the bottom. Like there's certain data management things around like metadata management, data quality, data cataloging. Again, because if you don't have any of these things, like especially the curation step is very hard to do. Going across from raw to products is you need to be able to store and process the data, right? So there's some orchestration, some compute storage, staging that you need. And then finally, data science, right? You may or may not use some of these, right? So that depends especially on the feature step. And then you can bring in whatever then data scientific steps or capabilities that you need. Then eventually you're able to consume it on the right. So you might ask, why show this? Like you probably say like, we've seen this before, right? It's not necessarily anything new. Like that's right. I'm not claiming to, in this case, to really present anything new. But the point I'm making is that if you start to create data products at an organizational level, it really, really, really helps to do this in a at least a minimally consistent way. Like you would want to make sure that not every business unit or analytics team or function goes about it themselves, right? Sometimes it's okay for several reasons to deviate a little bit, but like it's really, really, really helps to give people like a menu. It's like, here's how we do it, right? And then specifically, if you take a version like this, which is deliberately like technology agnostic, right? You can create versions like this one that is actually you project it onto a particular tech stack. So in this case, I took Amazon, but it could have been Google. Like I'm not saying you should use Amazon or anything else, but this was like, let's say that your organization happens to be an Amazon shop, right? And it might be a bit dated for some of the logos, but then what you can do is you can actually take this exact view and interpret, well, if that's the case, what would be these kind of technological capabilities, those platform components that would really help me bring this to your organization effectively. And so you see it, right? So there's S3 buckets and others on the internal and the external third-party data. And it obviously can still come from outside of AWS as well. But you've got very specific ways to bring in the data, right? Kinesis, Glue, data exchange, like depending on how often, what type of data, there's different, if it's event-driven or not, there's different options that you can use specific data ingestion techniques. If you look in data management, for example, there's Glue, there's lake formation, there's specific things you can use that help to kind of manage and govern your data. Obviously, the data science AWS has, it's not even just these 5, right? But there's like a whole suite of data science applications that exist. And also if you think about consumption, there's a lot of natively provided things like Glue, Athena, Redshift, etc., that can help make the data product available across different use cases. And now the power is, let's say that you've created, if especially if you're sitting in some sort of data enablement team, if you can show a page like this and have a conversation with somebody who has an idea, right? Or who is trying to figure out and make this real, like this becomes a menu, right? This is now, okay, if that's the type of data you need, or this is the frequency you need it for, or these are the types of things that you need from an AI perspective, you can almost switch on different things that you can see on this page. And what that helps do is that you don't just help a given data product, you make sure it's done the right way, right? That it's done efficiently, that not everybody in the organization starts buying new platforms separately, but you kind of really help them along. That's kind of why I included this and I've done it in a couple of places. Howard.
Yeah, there was a question by Indivo who said, are there opportunities and value to use AI assistants to help automate building the data products?
Yeah, that's a topic for at least 3 other books.
Yeah,
It's actually one I haven't gotten into that too much, but it's definitely something we're looking at a ton these days. If you look for not even just data products, but specifically AI for data management, right? Like if you are today, if you still are coding things manually, 100% end to end, specifically if you do things like writing definitions of data or writing data quality rules, if you're still doing that manually, like talk to me. I'm not charging you. I won't charge you. Like talk to me. But like you shouldn't do that. You're absolutely right. Across this whole page, there's a ton of, and specifically in the orchestration part here, there's a ton of AI that you can use. How to bring it in, how to kind of identify the data again, how to run profiling analysis, data quality checks. Metadata is almost entirely, at least suggested now right now, like pre-written. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Was that the question? Or
yes, that's the question. Indivo, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Then, as I said, my presentation goes with a little bit of delay. But like there's also a lot of attention provided on kind of architectural kind of guidelines. So you can use the blueprint that you just saw, but there's still certain things that you would like to make sure that you incorporate wherever that's kind of wherever you kind of can. Probably won't go one by one for all of them, but like there's kind of 5 big categories here. So one thing is really about like the specification of a data product. So make sure that the boundaries are clear, that ownership is clear, that it's canonical, right? So that's there in one particular way that you make it available. So it's atomic, so you can't like it's like where it is actually useful in and of by itself, right? So that it has value of itself, but you can't really break it down much further either. That's kind of the right functional unit here. A lot of codes you see here as a code. I'm not necessarily the expert here in that, but I get that it is the best practice that is used here. Again, like you do not want to do it manually. Like do anything as a code as much as you can. It helps the AI. It helps to kind of draw automation, enhance structure, all these things. I like metadata and observability a lot because like I mean, while I've written here about data products, like in a general sense, I'm very passionate about strategic data governance. For you to be able to know what data you have, where it lives, how to use it, you can't do any of that without minimum required metadata, right? So it may involve some lineage, but some documentation around the right metadata and how to do that, how fresh it is, the anomalies that exist. Then Howard, you mentioned it, data quality and integrity. So there are certain dimensions here called out. Completeness, consistency, validation. There's other dimensions too, but like how do you do that? How do you test it? How do you monitor it? Those are probably some of the more obvious ones. And then around data access and sharing, again, you mentioned it earlier as well. Here you have data contracts. That is one of the things that is almost always a good idea, especially if it's across organizational lines, but even inside, right? If there's a minimum way that you could almost subscribe to data and under explicit let's say agreements. Least privilege it's not special to data products. It's a good thing to do that anyway. But like in this case also, and an API first mindset really helps. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not necessarily the expert on these individual bullets, but they really do. If you kind of look at effective design and how to do this structurally sound, these are the things that kind of come to mind on how to do it. Now we're going to people. I think I have maybe 3 or 4 more slides. So I think we talked about now a lot of the data itself. We talked about like what is data product, right? Like what are kind of the key characteristics of them. We talked a bit about technology, but now we go to people. At the end of the day, it's still people, right? So in this case, like if you think about a data product, like what are the types of roles that you would need to build, to design, build, maintain, make sure that there's value driven off of the data product. And now this might look very, how do you say that, overwhelming. It's like, whoa, like every time like there's a data product, do I need all these people? And are they, well, you don't need a separate individual that is spending time every day for every data product the way you see it on this page. But what is important is that the way that these people, these roles, these mindsets are incorporated at some point in the life cycle for a given data product. Same here as with some of the other pages. I can't really go one by one here, but let me call out a couple of them. So the first ring here of individuals is in the so-called the core, right? So these are direct, substantial, and recurring contributions. I think the number one most important role here is the data product owner, right? It's at the center. Again, if you have something that is supposed to be built as a product with consumers in mind, how would you do that if nobody actually takes ownership of it as a product, right? So you take ownership of its value, its cost, and it's also like where that person is actually more or less in charge to make sure that everybody else on this page to some extent is involved and identified. Then they may or may not have a project manager or a scrum master or something like that. Like if it's a very, I mean, I've seen data product teams who have 50 people on them because they're so big and it's almost like it is one data product, but it's like, 10 or 15 data products really if you look underneath. And like they might even have a project manager or a scrum master. Sometimes it's the data product owner like does half the roles on this page, right? But just that's a more or less an optional role. But then other roles that are really critical include, for example, a data domain steward or architect. Very, very helpful. Like typically any data product should be nested in a given data domain. And so that, and by that, and it's really helpful if there's an individual who's more or less taking on the roles of a data domain owner or steward, or architect, so that you know that you are able to, embed it into that domain. You're not duplicating other stuff. You're like taking the right definitions. You're using the right, sources as you should, a source of record or source of truth. Data engineer, solution architect, of course, solution architect more in the beginning and afterwards. There's a heavy impact role in the beginning, later on a little bit less. Data engineer follows the architect. Tech support is a role that, later on, if you have a true data product, right, and which means that people are using it and value is being driven, it means that if there's a problem in a figurative way of speech, somebody needs to be able to pick up the phone, right? So that's where there's tech support. Like it's not just about building it. It's also about making sure you have the right support team around it. Very often are the same people, right? Sometimes the architect is the engineer, is the tech support. Sometimes they're not. That's okay. Those are some of the core roles. And then in the supporting layer, you see individuals that they do play a role, but not as directly, right? So for example, an enterprise architect does help influence, especially if it's a very foundational data product. They do have an opinion and their requirements through the solution architect do come to the solution, but it's not really in a direct way, right? For example, if you think about a head of data governance is in there, I mean, they don't have to look at every data product, right? But they would, but the respective requirements that they have in terms of cataloging or metadata or things like that should eventually make their way into the the people who are hands-on working on this product. There's a few more: data modeler, data quality specialist. Again, I don't know if that's normal. It's the first time I'm doing a book launch like this, but I feel like I say a lot. The book does more. Like that's I mean, every single one of them. Yeah, every single one of them there is outlined, right? What are the types of things that they usually bring to the team, and why is it valuable? So that's kind of how you can understand those. And then the ones in the outer ring, like they typically don't direct in any way directly. They don't interact in any direct way, but they do help make it work, right? So the fact that there's a broader data domain owner that gives in which kind of this product is nested, that really helps and supports. The fact that there's a CDO or data leader, for example, that actually says data products matter, right? And we need foundational enablement is really, really helpful. The chief privacy compliance or risk officer, bottom right, like the fact that they make sure that they aligned with this, that then data products can actually help really from a defensive and an offensive side, right? It's not just about taking data and making it as available as quickly as possible. It's really also about understanding what data it is, classifying it, putting the data contracts in place so that you have embedded by design, right, into the architecture of your solution, the privacy considerations, for example. So and having the chief privacy or compliance or risk officer going on record saying that they support it is very helpful. So yeah, that's a bit about single data product teams. Howard.
Yeah, I found the supporting one quite challenging because when we talk about contracts, then the YAML has to deal with all of the quality definitions. It has to deal with the metadata, the lineage, and they don't seem to be part of the core. And we see the data governance person there. So how do I mean? Of course, the contract's exposing the schema. It's exposing a lot of the metadata about the product. And so who would be building that? Who would be part of that core product that's packaging that for the product?
I think it could be a combination of the architect, the engineer, the data governance specialist, I suppose. I'm not exactly, maybe it's something to look into. Who can kind of help to put it together. So if it's like really as a code like that, then I would expect the engineer to play a heavy role here. If I would have the data governance specialist to play a heavy role in making sure that like that actual protocol is clear. Like how do you expect it? What's the template? How do you do that? There was one particular example that we had where a while back where we were driving kind of enhanced consistency for kind of interoperability standards, and they kind of adopted this MuleSoft as this kind of API engine, and we had a very specific template that we created to make all of these all of the data exchanges to be kind of captured like automatically by code, right? So like, so that it's not just about kind of the contract that specify what is going from where under which requirements, but also to make it self-discoverable, right? Observable. And so that in that case, it really became a technology heavy, role because they were able to do that. It was relatively greenfield, but I'm sure that there's different examples that you may have in your experience. So then a page that kind of helps to imagine some of the so what, right? So why, especially if you're a data leader again, or you're a chief data officer or somebody who wants to be able to kind of get away from why do I pay $2 million for Informatica or $3 million for talent or whatever tooling you're using or platforms or the team, you want to start creating a different narrative, right? So what data products should help you do is they should start to help you enable to talk in terms of a portfolio, right? Like a real estate portfolio in a way. But you should be able to say in this case, like, hey, I've got right now where we are, we've got 38 certified data products that we have, and every single one of them, you can almost like double click on them, right? It could be a CRM data set, it could be a customer 360, it could be, there's some examples in the bottom, it could be a product hub. There's 38 of them, right? And by definition, again, like we've said that, like if something's a data product, by definition, there are several use cases with quantifiable benefits attached to them. Well, in this case, there's 71 use cases that we described, right? That are available. Again, it could be cross-sell, it could be enhanced customer contact, it could be any sort of thing, depending on where you are. But those, given that the use cases are quantified, and there's a way that you can dedicate, you can kind of attribute that back to the data products, you can actually say, hey, across all these data products, there's over $150 million of revenues. It's only revenues and risks we captured here, right? So you can imagine this dashboard can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. There's also 18 specific critical risks that were mitigated. Like this type of story is totally different from you saying, I have 2,000 data quality rules. Completeness is 99%. I've got, 25,000 definitions captured. Like, so what? Like I've heard it, right? And so you have these data leaders having to advocate for investments in their team, but they can't really crack that story back to the business-oriented leaders on like why. Like this, if you follow everything else that we talked about, like the life cycle, some of the key metadata, how you identify data products, it allows you to tell a story like this, right? You now start talking about value. And the nice thing is also, and I'm not sure if I think there's a page that's going to come after, is it also shows you, you start seeing it on the top right a little bit, the data versus use cases. You start seeing what works and what doesn't work, right? So you can start showing these 38, and you can say, hey, some of them might be great. They're doing fantastic. Like if you have a real estate portfolio, maybe you have 38 houses, maybe 20 of them are doing great. They're under contract, but maybe 10 of them don't. They're empty. Why? Right? So you can actually start showing that even though value is good for some of the others, it's not for all of them. Right. So that's kind of what the message that we're describing. So just maybe, I think we're going on an hour. So Howard and others, if you want to, let me know. But maybe the final segue is into kind of the maturity of individual products. Right. We talk a great deal about that as well, and give you a lot of practical guidelines on how to do that. And so there's two examples that they're in the book and that I also created here that I'm not necessarily going to discuss in a lot of details, but there's kind of a structured framework you can use to use these dimensions that very closely mimic, let's say, the key properties that we talked about initially. You can see them on the left: awareness, understandability, interoperability, trust, actionability. And you can quantify how well is your data product doing. And so why is that important, right? Because very often, like the conclusion to people is clear. Like I can't tell you how many times we come into an organization, people say the data is bad. What does that mean? What do you mean? Is it there? Is it quality bad? Can you find it? Is it incomplete? Like there's many different ways that data can be bad, right? The data is an easy culprit, so to speak. And so here you kind of really decompose it into unique dimensions on how you can measure the maturity of specific data products. And again, like awareness, do people know where they are? Second, understandability. Given that people know where they are, do they understand it? Third, interoperability. So they know where it is, they can understand it. Can you actually use it? Next one. Okay, you can use it. Okay, you connect to it. Can you then the next one, trust. Okay, so but what about quality? I know I can use it and I have it in my environment, but I can't. Can you trust it? Actionability has to do with is there anything else you need to do before you can actually use it? Do you have to like, because very often if data quality is low, for example, in the trust dimension, and actionability is too, because you may have to do extra work to clean it up. Adoption and business impact, they're kind of more trailing dimensions. Adoption tracks more like how many people or how many times, how often is it being used, versus impact is more in terms of the dimensions we saw earlier, like revenues, cost, risk, things like that. Then product orientation is just it's something that measures, are you actually using that team structure that we just saw, right? Is there an actual owner in place, for example? And so if you now, and it's very easy and quick relatively to do this across data products that you have to kind of figure out where are you, which of these are low. And so you can see for this particular one, actually, this data product apparently is understandable, it's interoperable, trust is decent, it's actionable. Like that's not the problem. Problem is people don't know about it, right? The awareness one is the first one. That's the critical issue. Is the low awareness which drives low adoption impact. And why? Well, the product orientation is low. Like actually nobody is apparently owning this. Like nobody is looking at this and saying like, hey, we should put this in a catalog. That's the obvious like takeaway from this particular data product, for example. Whereas if you take a look at this one, like sales and ordering returns, you see the awareness is there. People understand it. They can also get access to it, but trust is low. Like Howard goes to your question, like data quality is low. Like they find discrepancies. And so that's why there's like, even though people are using it all the time because they have to, right? Adoption is high, business impact isn't fully there, right? And so these types of analysis are relevant for at least two different reasons. One, they're helpful at the level of a data product because it can help you drive higher impact for individual data products, but especially for if you are, let's say again, a data leader or data governance specialist or data enablement expert, if you have this view for 10, 15, 20 data products, you're going to start seeing patterns, right? You're going to start seeing patterns. And if you can say that for 20 of your data products, 10 of them are low in trust because data quality is bad, well, there you have now your business case to do something to have a minimum data quality program, for example. Or if awareness is lacking for a lot of them, well, that's a data quality of a data catalog solution, for example. Understandability is low. Well, that can help with like creating definitions. Like every single dimensions has very, very practical fixes, right? Both at an individual data product level as well as across a portfolio of data products. So that's kind of the piece that we also included to make sure that once you get to a portfolio, or maybe you inherit a position where there are a bunch of data products, it's a very structured and easy way to make sure that you actually get the most out of these products. And then the final bit. So far, almost all of what we talked about has been about kind of the individual data products. But what if you're interested about driving an organizational change, right? If you want to actually drive, you want to actually make sure that a broader organization like it kind of gets behind data products, or maybe like a related theme, like using data as an asset, for example, have it be a strategic enabling asset. No, I didn't create this by myself. I was halfway doing that and I was like, that's insane. There's corporate change frameworks everywhere. So let's just use an existing one. And so that's what I did. I used Kotter's 8-step model. It has 8 steps that almost all of them might really resonated with me and that you can apply to a data product kind of context. And so there's examples for each of all of these steps on how you can do that specifically for a data product journey. But maybe just a quick couple of examples is like a sense of urgency, right? I mentioned in the very, very beginning of our chat here today, I was visiting a couple of conferences the last couple of weeks, and I sense it everywhere that people are getting very anxious about this agentic capabilities. They're everywhere. They don't work, right? They can't get them to scale. There's a sense of urgency connected to finally, almost once and for all, maybe getting that minimally cleanliness and maturity around certain data foundations. Again, data product is the most direct, most impactful way to chip away at that, right? That's one of the ways that you could potentially create an initial sense of urgency. Build a guiding coalition usually involves, I mean, here you have to contextualize it for organizations, right? Like country, region, sector, size, but a guiding coalition, like 1, 2, 3 key leaders need to get together. Usually from if you have a data leader, that's a very useful one. If there's not one, you may actually have to have like the technology and the business kind of people come together, ideally in a certain context, right? A certain use case that doesn't work, or then the strategic vision is almost, you take the sense of urgency, but now you make it more specific, right? You actually say, like, here's how we're going to be able to change this. Here's the specific ways that, say, a data product can help kind of take the top 10 data bits that we need, and here are all the use cases we can enable if we get them truly managed and under control. The step that I had the most issue incorporating was a volunteer army, because I don't like the word army as much. Like, I don't think you need to have, like, especially when short-term wins is step 6, like, it doesn't really make sense to me to have an army at step 4. Like, that's the only reason why I was considering, should I really use this model? So I kind of maybe that's kind of the one that I just adjusted a little bit. In terms of the interpretation being, like, you want to have that initial group together who can actually work on this, right? So if you think about the data product team page that we looked at earlier, so who can be the owner, right? Who could be the solution architect that helps to create that blueprint that you could later on reuse across new data products, like this volunteer army, let's say. But like, I mean, that strategic initial group, like who are these people that you can kind of rely on and can come back to. Remove barriers, like whatever they are. It could be like a platform. It could be old bad experiences that are still there. It could also sometimes be individuals that are in a certain role that need to be removed. It could be like whatever. Like, identify what the specific obstacles are and the barriers, and address them. Right in the book, there's a whole list of the most likely barriers that can stand in the way of you treating your data as a product. Then the cliche almost, right? Generate the short-term wins, as always. Like, what can you do in like a 2, 3, 4, 5 month timeline so that it's no longer just a vision, right? You can actually talk about talk about the impact. And so in this case, though, I feel like any data related project or any kind of advisory project we do, this is almost always one of the things you say, like, so that's why it's almost a cliche. But I think for data products, it's actually even more powerful, because if you think again at what a data product is, at its very heart, it is some of the most impactful data that is driving identifiable use cases with a quantifiable impact. So you should be able to do this. If you are not able to have a very convincing story at point 6, step 6 here, let's say over the course of a few months, you're doing something wrong. Like, data products are incredibly powerful. So this is, in this case, it should be relatively straightforward to do that. Like, straightforward, not in terms of it's easy to create the impact, but should be easy to follow the steps and get to a story on how impact can be created. And then 7 and 8 are all about, like, how do you now make this a true behavioral change in your organization and not just 1 or 2 projects that worked, right? And so they have a lot of, I would say, things that would apply to kind of organizational change and not just to data products around how to do that. Howard.
Yeah, I seem to get the feeling that a lot of this product needs to align to your data strategy. So when you're building the data strategy, the use cases are coming out, the value's being defined, and you're driving that on an ongoing basis.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, one of the big, I'm going to see them tomorrow again. One of the biggest technology clients we have, like, when we wrote their data strategy, that's actually what that's what their data strategy became. They said, like, we are not going to be able to address all data everywhere. We're going to drive organizational change by focusing on data products. That's actually, that became the data strategy. And so either it becomes the data strategy, or it must be a foundational pillar inside of it, right? So that's absolutely true. Yeah. That's all I had.
Great. So just before too many people leave, we'll ask Debbie just to do the prize, the giving away on the prize, and then we can open up for discussion. That's quite helpful.
Yes. So if everyone, whoever wants to win the book, if you can raise your hand, please, and then keep it raised. Especially once we call out the winner, if you can please keep your hand raised so we can make sure the correct number, the correct winner gets their prize. So if anyone wants to raise their hand and maybe win a copy of this book, please do.
I was hoping that Gabriella she wanted to buy the book, so I was wondering if she hasn't raised her hand.
Let's see.
Should I raise it? Okay.
She can buy the book. So okay, I'm going to close this in 3, 2, 1. All right. Willem, we have between 1 and 12. Oh, someone just dropped their hand. Please raise your hand if you want to.
Don't worry.
Okay, between 1 and 12.
Just a number?
Yes. Any number.
See if I see a number around me here somewhere. I don't know. 4.
Number 4. All right, Niels, congratulations.
Niels Conradi,
You won
well
a
done.
copy. We will make
thank
sure
you.
you receive it. Congratulations. And so I will contact you and organize you to receive the prize. Thank you all for playing and partaking. And I'm sure now we can open the floor for any questions. Thank
Yes,
you all. And I'll drop a link to purchase the book as well in the comments. So if you'd like to buy the book, you'll find the link in the comments.
Kim, I thought you put your hand up. Was that for a question or?
No, it was for the
book prize. Okay. You're ahead. Any questions before we go? Okay, so we've got Krishni. Krishni? I'm not sure whether that was for the book or whether your hand's up. No, it went down. Dale? I think that was also for the book.
No, I was just saying it was very informative presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Yeah, so I mean, really nice, and I really like when we do this, the data strategy. That's the one that looks at the problems that the business need and the value, and that's where we start delivering value and start discussing either it's risk mitigation or cost reduction or whatever it is, and we can now engineer a product that's going to address that problem. But I'm assuming that you will also get into that minimal viable product. So you may start off with a bigger product and you're going to have to grow that product to where you want it. So there's almost a journey on that product to get to where it needs to be.
That's right. I mean, and that's kind of where the analogy or the connection to like non-data product management kind of comes into play as well. It's like you can have iterations and versions. Like you have consumers, you bring them an initial product, see what the feedback is, and then you take that in and you enhance it. Right. That's almost the whole, like you almost want to get away from some of that even though I had this life cycle left to right, which seems very waterfall-y, right? It's like it doesn't have to be like that at all. Like these are good steps to keep in mind, but you can definitely iterate, right? You can definitely have like true product management, how you have it, because it's actually with data, especially with AI coming up right now, it's just like any other product out there, like a car or like whatever. Like the car that people want today might not be the one they really want a year or two from now. Like it changes, like what people want changes. And so like bringing that back into what you're able to kind of get into this minimal, where it's worth it to put it into a product and where it's not is very key. And I would, if people haven't really maybe tasted this yet, it's fun too, right? It's like, gosh, data can be a nasty topic, right? People are always upset. It doesn't work. Quality is that. It's always, we don't want to own it. We don't want to create the lineage. It's always about, right? It's very, and I feel like data products has a very meaningful way to get people together around, to kind of rally them around a positive story, like a positive narrative. Like how do you make this real for people, right? So a lot of these roles, the engineers, the architects, like their role tend to be very technically defined usually. And so now they can actually see and feel the impact that they have through data products.
And is the product owner quite business fluent or has a lot of business acumen in terms of what makes a valuable product, what's going to drive this value. They need to be
Yes.
getting into those discussions. They can't be technical.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is one of the key things we work on in a lot of places where they say, okay, great, I love this. Now let's do it. And let's go find these people. And then it's sometimes a challenge, right? And so, but the preference almost always is that it's somebody that, the person who drives the broader capability is from a business perspective. You need that because otherwise you forever play this game of trying to convince the business of the value, right? And that, which you don't want to do. You want them to inherently own it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody? I don't see anything else in the chat. Any last questions before we close? No. William, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.